Private First Class Bradley Manning was arrested for allegedly leaking classified documents to WikiLeaks. He's been held in military prison for 7 months without a trial. And what they're doing with him is sparking outrage with human rights organizations. For more on this, let's turn to Jane Hamsher, founder of FireDogLake.com. Jane is petitioning to stop the mistreatment of Manning. Jane, first tell us what is going on with Manning. How are they confining him so that people understand what he's going through?
Well, David House, who is one of the only people who visits Manning, wrote in Fire Dog Lake today about his trip to go visit Manning in Quantico last weekend. And he's being held basically in isolation. He's not allowed to have any newspapers, to watch any news on TV. He doesn't have bedding. He's not allowed out of his cell except for very limited time. He can't exercise except for walking around in circles and chains. And according to Jeff Kay, who's a psychologist who also writes for us today, who works with torture victims, he says this is how you break someone. And this week in the New York Times, Charlie Savage just says that the government is trying to break Manning to get him to roll over on Julian Assange because they don't have enough evidence against Assange or Manning without a confession. And so everybody is very concerned that Manning, the only evidence that's been provided against him has come from a guy named Adrian Lamo, a former hacker whose story doesn't even match up with his own story. So there's something that's going on here. It's really wrong, and we want the Brig Commander to lift this stuff that's being done to him because it hasn't been proven that he's done anything yet.
Right. You know, 23 hours in isolation, for people to understand how extreme that is, we don't do that to anyone outside of our most dangerous criminals, the guys we have in Supermax, the Unabomber, the World Trade Center bombers, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really extreme, and the guy hasn't been convicted or even tried. So it's really strange. But, you know, Assange went further in that interview that I had with him, and he said that Manning might, in his words, be a political prisoner. Does that go too far, or what's your thoughts on that, Jane?
No, I absolutely agree with that. Look, the guy who's provided the only evidence against him, Adrian Lamo, was in a mental institution, a forced institutionalization by the police 2 weeks before he said he had these chats with Manning. And the only proof they have is in these chat logs that Manning turned over to Wired magazine and to the Washington Post back in May. Now this week, the New York Times is publishing that, oh, suddenly that Manning remembers that in these chat logs that there was actually a moment when there was a physical disk turned over from Manning to somebody from WikiLeaks. Did Wired and the Washington Post just not notice this in the chat logs? Why didn't the New York Times get the chat logs? Well, because Manning says that his disk was seized by the FBI. Charlie Savage went to Pulitzer Prize. Didn't he say, well, let's go to the Washington Post or Wired? Are they sitting on this story? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Adrian Lamo's story doesn't even mesh with the one that the military has. So, you know, this is not enough to hold this guy with.
All right, Jane Hamsher, thanks for joining us.